The council chamber was quiet by the time Dante left it. There was silence behind him as he stepped back into the city. The world above continued at human speed, lights changing, traffic flowing, lives moving forward without pause or ceremony. The council had debated for an hour. Nothing had changed. This, Dante reflected, was progress. He walked without hurry, letting the city fold around him. He had learned long ago that time did not respond to urgency. It moved as it always had, indifferent, patient, and entirely uninterested in his preferences. It should have been easier now. He had endured moments like this before. Recognition always came with consequences. Distance from her was the usual solution. Distance and time. And yet, despite himself, his thoughts returned to a narrow bookshop and a woman who arranged stories by how they ended. He should not have thought of her. Dante had learned, over centuries, how to redirect thought, how to compartmentalize, how to place memory behind walls thick enough that it could not press through without permission. It was a skill born of necessity, honed through repetition. Still, the bookshop returned to him uninvited. The warmth of it, the quiet order, the way the air had seemed to settle when she looked up from the counter, as though the room itself had recognized her before he did. He dismissed the thought and kept walking. The city reflected itself back at him in glass and steel. His own image appeared and vanished in passing windows, tall, indistinct, well-dressed enough to pass unnoticed. He had perfected that balance, presence without invitation, authority without explanation. He crossed the river and did not stop this time. It was a small thing, perhaps, an omission, a choice so minor it would not have registered to anyone else. But Dante felt it settle into him with familiar weight. The pattern had resumed. He did not catalogue the previous lives. Not yet. That way lay indulgence, and indulgence led to proximity. Proximity led to mistakes he had sworn not to repeat. His heart, though not beating now, would break if he allowed it. Instead, he focused on what remained consistent. She was always grounded, always observant, drawn to stories that ended badly and loved anyway. She built lives around meaning rather than comfort. She never remembered him, not at first, and yet there was always that moment. The pause, the sense of something just out of reach, recognition without context. It was the most dangerous stage. He kept walking. Evelyn closed the shop later than she intended. The light outside had shifted without her noticing. The late afternoon thinning into evening while she adjusted displays and reshelved books that did not need moving. She had done this before, delayed her own departure without an apparent reason. But tonight the impulse felt sharper, more insistent, as though leaving would mean abandoning something unfinished. She paused near the poetry shelves, fingers resting lightly on the spines. There was a book out of place. It wasn't dramatic. Just a slim volume pushed slightly forward, its alignment off by a fraction. She frowned at it, trying to remember when she had last touched it. She couldn't. That, more than the displacement itself, unsettled her. Evelyn picked it up and turned it over in her hands. The cover was familiar in a way that made no sense. Not recognizable exactly, but known. Like a word she'd forgotten the meaning of but could still pronounce. She opened it at random. The page fell easily beneath her thumb. She read the first line, then the second, then stopped. Her breath caught, shallow and unsteady. "This is ridiculous," she said aloud to the empty shop. She closed the book and slid it back into place with deliberate care. The shelves resumed their order. The moment passed, and yet something remained. Dante stood across the street from the bookshop longer than he intended. The lights were on, the door still open. He could see her moving inside, indistinct through the glass, a shift of shape and color that nonetheless drew his attention with unerring precision. He did not step closer. He had made that mistake before. Distance was not cruelty. It was preservation. Of her. Of himself. Of whatever fragile possibility still existed between them. He turned away before she could look up. The city accepted him back without comment. Evelyn locked the door and leaned her forehead briefly against the glass. She told herself it was exhaustion, that she had stayed too late, that everyone felt unsettled sometimes, without cause. Still, the sense lingered that something had brushed past her life and continued on without explanation. She turned off the lights and stood in the sudden dimness, listening to the quiet. For a fleeting moment, she felt certain she had been watched. Not followed, not threatened, simply seen. Dante did not return home immediately. He walked until the city thinned, until movement slowed and sound softened. He let the night stretch around him, familiar and indifferent. Restraint, he reminded himself, was not denial. It was survival. And yet, as he finally turned toward his apartment, the thought followed him, persistent, unwelcome, and entirely human. He had always found her. The question was no longer whether he would again. It was how long he could endure pretending that distance was enough. Dante's apartment greeted him with practiced efficiency. Lights rose softly as he entered. The city spread itself beyond the windows, a lattice of movement and noise that never truly slept. He removed his coat and gloves and set them aside with care, not because it mattered, but because routine had always steadied him. He stood at the window longer than necessary. Below, lives unfolded at human speed, brief, urgent, full of small decisions that felt enormous while they were being made. He had watched this rhythm repeat itself countless times. Cities changed. Names shifted. The pattern endured. So did she. He turned away from the glass before memory could deepen into indulgence. He would not trace the other lives tonight. He would not recall the endings. He had learned, the hard way, that memory sharpened longing, and longing eroded restraint. Instead, he focused on what could still be controlled. Distance, silence, time. These had always been his safeguards. He poured a glass of water and let it sit untouched in his hand. He did not need it. He did not need much of anything anymore. That, too, had once seemed like a kind of strength. Now it felt merely like an absence. Evelyn lay awake longer than usual. The flat above the shop was quiet. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the building settle around her, to pipes and distant footsteps and the faint hum of the city insisting on its own continuity. She tried to pinpoint the moment her day had tilted. There was no obvious answer, no dramatic interruption, just a conversation that lingered longer than it should have. A feeling that had followed her home without invitation. She closed her eyes and pictured the shop as it had been earlier. The warm light, the shelves, the counter worn smooth by years of use. And him. The thought came unbidden, sharp and strangely steady. She did not know his story. She did not know why his presence had unsettled her. She only knew that something in her had shifted, not forward, not backward, but sideways, as if her life had briefly aligned with another track before slipping free again. Sleep, when it finally came, was thin and dreamless. Across the city, Dante extinguished the lights one by one. Darkness settled easily around him. He stood for a moment in the quiet, listening to nothing in particular, aware of the familiar ache that followed restraint, not pain exactly, but the knowledge of something deliberately set aside. He had chosen distance. He always did. For now, it was enough. But as he lay still in the dark, the certainty remained, calm, unyielding, and entirely unwelcome. The pattern had not ended. It had only begun again.